Look, it's absolutely no secret that Stranger Things is one of the biggest streaming shows of all time, and definitely the face of Netflix after the conclusion of its core originals such as Orange is the New Black and the Marvel Netflix series. And it's not hard to see why it's so huge. Stranger Things had all the ingredients for success: a fresh cast with a few familiar faces, the aesthetic and incredible score of an 80s period piece, an engaging mystery with just enough horror and edge, with the perfect heaping of comedy and character moments to be immortalized as memes within pop culture. You can't go to the entertainment section of a Target or Walmart and dodge Stranger Things. You can't go to a bookstore without stumbling upon an adaptation, a Hot Topic or FYE without running into merch. Stranger Things isn't a show, it's a phenomenon. But because of Stranger Things' status as the champion of Netflix, it doubles as the representation for the platform as a whole, and thus, its treatment highlights a pretty big flaw with Netflix as a whole. A flaw that wasn't really there at the start of the show's run in 2016, but really bothered me with the release of the third season last summer. So let's really sit down and dig into this flaw, how it's being exposed through strategies from other streaming services, and how Stranger Things has not only been affected by all of this, but could really turn the tides for Netflix as a whole. Let's talk about why Stranger Things Season 4 needs to be aired weekly. We can't get into this topic without discussing the negative effects of binge culture. Netflix promotes a culture that, thanks to other streaming services, is finally being challenged. And now Netflix needs to adapt. I am, of course, referring to binge culture, the idea of consuming media in its entirety as quickly as possible. Just a constant stream of entertainment, absorbing it all into our eyeballs, and moving on to the next show or movie just as fast as we came upon it. A few years ago, this wasn't really a big deal, and in fact was this brand new exciting thing. For the first time ever, you didn't have to wait, and you could binge and indulge. It was becoming a common thing for people to do, an activity that we all participated in, and Netflix stood for all of that. But that's when Netflix was arguably much smaller than it is now in terms of content. If you guys remember back in 2015-2016, Netflix stated that their end goal was to have a grand majority of its catalog consist of original content rather than shows and movies we've seen over and over again. Fast forward today, and well, that is a significant portion of Netflix, at least in what's being promoted. Granted, not everything is seen as original as it may seem. Of course, their original anime tends to be already in Japan before it premieres on the service, and Netflix just acquires the streaming rights before dropping the entire season all at once. Still, it has the Netflix original label, so they weren't wrong. Last year, 2019, in the before times, Netflix actually released more original content on their service than the entire television industry in 2005. Let that sink in for a moment, that's actually insane. The streaming giant released 371 new TV shows and movies on the service in the US this year, according to data from Variety Insights. This is an increase of 54.6% over the 240 shows and movies Netflix released in 2018. For context, this figure is greater than the number of original series that the entire US TV industry released in 2005. The last year Netflix managed to exceed the TV industry's total. That includes broadcast networks, cable networks, and premium cable networks. The genres included in this analysis are documentaries, adult animation, alternative TV shows, comedy drama, news, and talk. The number, which doesn't include content targeted for kids, also includes all movies released on Netflix, including 30 which had limited theatrical runs. Just over 1/4 of the 371 are produced by Netflix out of its overseas markets. Now, really take this into consideration. Netflix originals didn't begin rolling out until 2013 and didn't go into full swing until 2015. It only took 7 years to release as much content on Netflix compared to the nearly 93 years it took for traditional television. Although the number of original television content multiplied exponentially by 2018, Netflix may catch up in the not-so-distant future, as insane as that sounds. However, Netflix hasn't made any big strides to accommodate for their larger catalogs when it comes to consumption and release. Sure, we've had weekly talk shows and instances like the Great British Baking Show, but Netflix has been vocal about continuing their current model of releasing full seasons all at once and letting people pick at it whenever. When Complex's pop culture Twitter account posted an article speculating on the trajectory of Netflix releases, the company responded with this to say, "The weekly release of licensed titles, like the Great British Baking Show, isn't new, and in hopes of keeping Rhythm and Flow's winner a surprise, we're trying something new, but not happening with more shows than that." Now, VPN sponsors on YouTube make it clear. You can watch Netflix in other territories, and in those territories, shows like Rick and Morty are released weekly as they premiere stateside. What they say about this not being anything new is true. It's just rarely seen over here in the USA. But what Netflix won't acknowledge is that change is needed. Releasing a majority of their content in the same manner isn't doing anyone any favors after a while. If anything, it detracts from the hype. How can they expect other originals to hit Stranger Things status if they have to fare in the algorithm, relying on star power and being promoted on the front page for success? But let's go back to Stranger Things for a moment. Tell me, what do you remember about the last season? I would guess Hopper's emotional sacrifice, Billy's emotional sacrifice, Robin and Steve bonding, Robin coming out to him. Alexi's growth into an ally, and his tragic death, or Dustin's long-distance girlfriend Susie. And I can't blame you, these were all phenomenal moments. But tell me, do you remember Nancy and Jonathan's escapades at the Hawken Post? Remember that exploding rat? Elle having to locate Billy with her powers? Steve and Dustin's initial search for the Russians? And I'm not asking if you remember the existence of those scenes, but the details, the cinematography, the acting, the emotions, the score. Because all those scenes I listed off first, guaranteed you remember those moments to a T. And I don't believe it's solely because the other moments were weak or not as memorable. I think it's also because chances are you're a viewer who tried to binge season 3 as quickly as possible. When it comes to Netflix originals, especially the big ones with an intense ongoing narrative that you wait all year, if not longer, to jump back into, isolated episodes can have a habit of ceasing to exist, instead having the entire season blend together as one big movie. Episode counts become akin to a percentage. How close am I to the end? Why do we all have a habit of thinking like this? Well, two factors: spoilers and FOMO. A season dropping in full means someone is always going to go out of their way to skip to the end of a final episode and spread the big death, or the big kiss, or the big twist, whatever is sure to be iconic moment across the internet before most people can even start to wake up the next morning and start the season. These bad boys go live at 3 a.m. over here on the East Coast. Even over on the West Coast, I imagine a midnight release isn't super desirable if you have a job or class or whatever obligation the next morning. When it's one episode, sure, not much of a big deal. But when it's upwards of 13 hours of content, that's an entire day or weekend that you're expected to dedicate to binge through the season in order to be caught up and avoid a robbery of satisfaction or a heavy spoiler. In doing so, you're not really immersing every episode in full, aside from a premiere and a finale. I'd argue most of the time people tend to care about the beginnings of an episode because it tends to pick up from a cliffhanger, have their attentions divert throughout the hour, but by the end they're completely hooked because something suddenly happened in the last 10 to 15 minutes, and look, another cliffhanger. Lather, rinse, and repeat. It's harder for viewers to be invested for hours on end with no reprieve, when you're expected to keep watching in order to avoid the threat of being spoiled. It's that method that causes people to check their phones as soon as an episode cools down, only to be brought back up to speed when the sound design and music score gets intense or ominous. Netflix shows know what they're doing. They're aware spoilers dominate the conversation on social media, and that people will neglect their responsibilities to engage with an entire season. Not that it makes them evil masterminds or anything. Spoilers also tend to exist casually without malicious intent. It takes nothing for someone to just live tweet a new season or post a video on their Instagram story. Not to mention, over the years, spoilers with no context has become a huge trend, which I'm sure higher ups love. It's high engagement and free promotion. And all of this goes hand in hand with the FOMO angle of binge culture and really streaming culture as a whole. The need to binge an entire season and remain caught up on a story and avoid spoilers prompts viewers to discuss the contents of what they just watched as soon as possible, forcing others who are invested or even just interested to avoid social media and hop on the show as quickly as possible to understand what's going on and be a part of the conversation. But this highlights why binge releases for major Netflix originals, especially Stranger Things, serve as such a fatal flaw. The binging and need to conversate creates a very small window for a show and season to be relevant. Typically, it's only about 2 weeks, but if it's lucky, it can go on for a month or so. Now, what's interesting is this doesn't seem to apply when a show first blows up. In that case, the binge format makes sense because if the show gains steam, case in point you, everyone can enjoy the first season at their own pace and just enjoy the memes. But again, that's when a show only has one season or two. The commitment is much lower and the pressure to catch up isn't as massive. Yet there's a code that's pretty easy to crack. A remedy for the situation. A solution that allows viewers to fully absorb and appreciate every single episode of a season, minimize the abundance of spoilers that need to be avoided, and actually prolongs the discussion of the show each and every season. It's the thesis of this video, weekly releases. And it's something that the competitors of Netflix have adapted to pretty good results. Disney Plus is the easiest example to point to with the success of The Mandalorian. Launching a brand new streaming service that could make or break the future of the company's entertainment, launching a live-action Star Wars series that's canon to the films is genius, but not releasing the season at once, rather releasing a new episode every Friday, that's where the service struck gold. The Mandalorian, alongside other Disney Plus originals, but on a smaller scale, created what I consider to be the perfect streaming experience when it comes to original content. Every Friday, during its first season run, Mandalorian dominated social media. Baby Yoda gifs were flooding the timeline, theories and analysis for each individual episode were popping up all over Reddit and YouTube, and general praise from both a casual audience and professional critics. You truly could not escape this series. Let me reiterate, this was every Friday, spilling into the weekend and then remaining the talk of the town throughout the week as people were able to get around to it or start it for the first time. This lasted for 2 months. What Netflix original stays on the timeline constantly for 2 months? Not just memes, but pure genuine discussion. The FOMO still exists, but not in the way that's nearly as demanding as Netflix's current model. Because it's only a single 40-minute episode, instead of an entire season of 8 to 13 episodes, it's much less intimidating to newer viewers. Even as the episode counter piles up, instead of people having to worry about watching 3 seasons and 100 recap and ending explain videos on YouTube, jumping on The Mandalorian meant watching the amount of episodes available at that time. Imagine only having to watch 3 episodes to catch up. This way, if you fall off in the middle of the season, you hypothetically only have to dedicate 2 hours, if that, to catch up and rejoin for the end of the season. If you enjoy binging, you don't lose that. You can just wait until the weekend a season concludes to go through all the episodes. It offers more flexibility than any big Netflix original, and honestly, it shouldn't be that way. That's just sad. On a smaller scale, Harley Quinn on DC Universe is another great example. As a weekly release, all the small moments of each episode stand out. It allowed clip channels to post snippets of every episode, every week, to pretty good numbers. A lot of clips having close to 1 million views, if not more. If this show was just dropped on a service in full, I think we'd only see clips of the really big moments get the spotlight, neglecting the work that went into the other 90% of the season. With upcoming Disney Plus series such as the buttload of MCU properties, other Disney revivals and reboots alongside Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple TV, and others joining in the weekly release hype, with titles such as The Boys, Central Park, and HBO already releasing most of their titles weekly, Max originals seem like they're the alternate between weekly and all at once depending on the show. I think Netflix can't ignore the signs much longer. They're going to have to adapt. But why Stranger Things? Why should Netflix take the gamble with their biggest property? Why this far into its run? Well, a few reasons, and it's not just the popularity factor, but the kind of show Stranger Things is. For example, I stated in the intro, it's the perfect family show for the platform in terms of offering something for everyone in the family. The lead characters open it up to the 13 to 17 age demographic, and I'm sure even that skews a little bit younger. Its tone and edge allows it to appeal to the 18 to 24 and 23 to 34 demographic, and the older characters in 80s setting pretty much serves to lure in everyone else who either has a strong sense of nostalgia for the time period or Winona Ryder. Because of this fun for all ages image the show portrays, I imagine most families and friend groups probably gather around the TV and watch an episode or 2 at a time anyways. But it probably doesn't sound too appealing to sit there for, again, 8 to 9 hours in one sitting and only committing a few parts of the season to memory. However, if you change it to a weekly series, I can easily see Stranger Things ascending into a show that every Friday or at some point in the weekend, the whole family gathers up around the TV, or you go and meet up with your friends, even if it's just over a Discord call. You watch the episode for the week, whether if it's online or offline, and get your theories and speculations ready for the next week. Weekly naturally strums up more engagement and more publicity, which is why it's how TV shows have debuted for so long now. Again, Mandalorian dominated for 2 months straight. Why wouldn't we want the same thing for Stranger Things? Hell, did we forget Game of Thrones and how that lived in everyone's heads rent-free for what felt like way too long? Not to mention, Stranger Things already takes much longer for new episodes to come out compared to any other Netflix series. Granted, it makes sense as to why. The actors are in demand within Hollywood, and of course the writers probably want to make sure they're producing the best quality scripts and stories possible, but still, why do we need to wait nearly 2 years at this point just to have a show come and go in a night? For Stranger Things, out of all the originals, Netflix is much better stretching it out over months and letting consumers savor each and every moment and then dipping out for a year. Also, the creators I've mentioned before, season 4 or 5 could be the final season. Disappearing for such a long time, just to go out with what will amount to a whimper in terms of public reception, with our short attention spans, just sounds like an incredibly anticlimactic way to go out. Applying this to the other Netflix series, not every original needs to be weekly, and if anything, that won't do consumers any more favors. I'm only referring to the big serialized Netflix shows that ultimately keep the subscriptions around. We don't need Black Mirror, The Floor is Lava, or Too Hot to Handle to be weekly. They work better as binge experiences, things you can put on whenever. But Russian Doll, Ozark, I'm not okay with this. If that gets renewed, spread those episodes out, let them marinate. Let people come up with theories and memes on a weekly basis. The bingeable content is still there. Don't get rid of the format completely, but balance it out more. Add structure to the platform. Make it easier on the viewers and yourselves. Because once the competition starts stealing away that spotlight again with Mandalorian Season 2, more people are going to have a taste for that weekly experience again. The bottom line is, give people something to look forward to every week, and it can go a long way. Streaming is the future, and it's here to stay. But to ensure that streaming is an advancement for television and not a step backwards, we really have to assess what works and doesn't work, and acknowledge when things have to change. And in this case, I think it's a step in the right direction. But as always, I want to know what you guys think about this. Do you agree? Do you like binging? Do you hate it? Let us know in those comments down below, or tweet to us of Roundtable vids, or me at @StretcherNemo. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the Roundtable for more incredible cartoon content. I'm Nemo, this is a streaming discussion video, and I will see you next time. Peace.